Well, it's good to see everyone today. We're making a special video about Mozambique, Africa, and I'm here with Dr. Charles Woodrow and also with Sean Reese, who is over Africa for HeartCry. And Dr. Woodrow is a surgeon who has served as a missionary for many, many years in the country of Mozambique. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, and it's great to have Sean here. You're about ready to head out on a trip, aren't you?
Yes, sir. Tomorrow.
Where are you headed?
Off to South Africa.
All right. Well, wonderful. Now we're going to talk about Mozambique, and we're going to talk about medical missions. And as I've already made videos before on this matter, we all recognize that there seems to be some kind of a rift. You know, a lot of men with really good theology may not get involved in medical missions, and then there's a lot of people who are involved, well-meaning people in medical missions, but maybe lack the theology. And then, of course, around the world, we recognize that God has that perfect mixture of people who are doctors, who are capable, and also good theologians whose primary concern is the advancement of the kingdom and the salvation of souls. And I believe that Dr. Woodward is one of those persons. So, first of all, how long have you been in Mozambique?
We've been working in Mozambique, my wife, myself, 5 children along the way since 1990, for 30 years now.
1990 is 30 years ago. It doesn't seem like it, does it?
Yeah.
Now, what were the conditions like when you first went to Mozambique?
Well, all through the 1980s, Mozambique was the poorest country in the world. This was due to a combination of factors. They'd been engaged in a civil war that was going on for 15 years by the time we got there. And it was run by a communist government, which was closed to the free market economy. And therefore, things were very poor and difficult in the country. Besides the profound poverty because of the Civil War, which was still going on when we got there, the hospital I was assigned to work at was actually attacked and overrun by guerrilla soldiers 4 times in our first 2 years there. So it was a land with a lot of suffering, but the Lord has brought it a long ways in the past 30 years.
So you say it has improved over 30 years?
Yes, it's the communist government. They decided they'd had enough of communism, and in 1995 they actually instituted a new democratic constitution, which allows for a free market economy. Things have improved radically since then.
Now, how did the Lord open up doors for you to go there?
Well, because it was a communist government, it was closed to missionary work almost entirely. But I was able to get into the country because I offered my services as a general surgeon, and they assigned me to work in a government hospital, so they opened the doors. They were very happy to have the medical humanitarian help, and they took what came with it very willingly.
And how would you say that the Lord, this is a common scenario, but how did he use medical missions in order to open up the door for the preaching of the gospel?
Well, first of all, because of the great medical need, the government was disposed to let me come in, even though their official stance was to repress Christianity. They needed the medications and the operations that I was able to bring with me. And then, of course, in the hospital, by the grace of God, I was assigned to a facility that only had one other doctor. And within 9 months, that doctor returned to Canada, and I became the only doctor in the facility for the next 8 years. So I was allowed to function from that hospital much as a missionary physician would do. In fact, our organization ended up providing all the medications, everything that was necessary to equip the surgical block and keep it functioning. And therefore, when I began praying with all the patients in the operating room and doing evangelistic rounds on the wards, and even leading evangelistic services Sunday afternoons in the hospital, they were just happy to have me there, and nobody tried to restrain the evangelistic part of my personality.
Now, so you're doing surgery, you're seeing patients, but also doing evangelism and Bible studies. You tell us a little bit more about just the evangelistic opportunities and how you did that.
Yes, well, we prayed actually with every person who ever came through the operating room. We distributed Gospels of John in the clinic, As I mentioned, we had evangelistic rounds during the week on the wards. And then Sunday afternoon, I would walk through the halls of the hospital, calling the patients and their family members to come hear the word of the Lord, receive help for your soul. And I'd take them to the main hall of the hospital, where every week we'd have between 20 and 120 people show up. Most of whom had never heard the gospel, even people who had been members of churches in the area. And along the way, there were people who lived near the hospital who, therefore, I was able to start a discipling relationship with them, invite them to Bible studies. And in time, a church was planted from the people who'd been discipled. And but I was concerned about the people who lived much further away from the hospital, who couldn't have ongoing contact with us. And we would refer them to local churches, knowing that many of those churches would be preaching a works-oriented gospel. And I became concerned very much about that, because once-off contact evangelism is limited if you can't get the good follow-up. And so we began putting a great deal of effort into helping the existing churches. We brought in excellent Christian literature from Doctrines of Grace perspective. We made it available for free for people who wanted to check it out and read it from our home and from the hospital. And in time, we opened up a Christian bookstore, sold the literature for half of what it cost us. And were involved with Editora Fiel later on, and helped them get their conferences going in Nampula to train pastors who came from all over the country. That was in 2000. We began having our first Fiel conferences, and just trying to do whatever we could to strengthen the existing church, as well as continuing to work with the churches, our church that we had established in Nampula as well.
Now, from how far away did people come to your hospital?
Well, because the country was so poor, and even the government hospitals didn't have the supplies and the equipment that they needed. Often they didn't have antibiotics to treat patients who had large bowel operations, which means they would get infected by their own bacteria and have a very bad outcome, or they didn't have analgesics or pain medicine to give the patients afterwards. Yet we were always kept supplied through Christians in the West. We had people coming to our hospital from all over the province of Nampula, and also the three surrounding provinces, and even another province further to the south. So people were coming from 5 of Mozambique's 10 provinces so that they could get their operations at our facility. It gave us a great opportunity to spread the gospel through those 5 provinces, staying right where we were.
So you mentioned that it was really a closed country, the gospel, but you seem to have had incredible freedom to share the gospel, start Bible studies. Do you attribute, well, of course we attribute that to the providence of God, but humanly speaking, would you say it was medical missions that opened the door?
Medical missions gives many opportunities. I like to talk about the benefits of medical evangelism. People come to you, first of all. You don't have to go to them with them thinking you're invading their privacy. They come to you asking you to help them. And so you have the opportunity to reach a large geographical area. And you're helping them medically without charging. And they know that you're not doing it for ulterior motives. And so you've established a relationship of care and concern and compassion with them. And then when you begin to share the gospel, they know you're not doing it for ulterior motives, that you really want to help them. And if you've succeeded in helping them with an operation that solved a problem that has plagued them for sometimes decades, then you get a lot of credibility. And when you tell them that you've got another problem you may not be aware of, and it's not treated with medications or with operations, it's a spiritual problem that only Christ can resolve, and let me tell you about that, then you've got some credibility already in your favor, and they'll listen to you. Then when people are in a hospital, even people who normally are trying to push God away and trying to avoid a confrontation with God, they're not in the hospital. They're much more disposed to seeking God's help. They know they've got a problem that is greater than they can handle, and they want that help from the Lord. So you get to evangelize in an atmosphere where people are seeking divine help and not resisting it. So these are wonderful opportunities that you have in medical evangelism that just create an open door. And we were thankful we could take advantage of that.
You know, I spent many years in Peru, in the rural areas, way up in the mountains or the jungle. Yeah, I'm a preacher, but I can't tell you how many times I wished that I had either been a doctor also, or a nurse, or something, because you see so many people suffering. And even though the end goal is the gospel, there's still, if the compassion and mercy of Christ is in us, you see certain needs. I can remember one time someone asked me, I was back in the States, and I think they were talking about the superficiality of America and plastic surgery, and I just said, many times I wished that I was a plastic surgeon. And they said, how can you say something like that? I said, because I have seen such horrible deformities of children and men and women that could have been fixed and helped. And so it is about the gospel. But if you have the Holy Spirit, the love of God, you're going to look at people, and also it's just, you want to put an end to their suffering, because it is tremendous. And now, Sean, did you go there? Were you there visiting, or what did you met him in a conference? Tell me about that before we go on.
Yes, I visited Dr. Woodrow a few years ago. He was very persistent in inviting Brother Paul Washer to his conference, and so he didn't
Which
get
I'm
you.
going to go as soon as I get healthy, I promise.
So I went to look at the conference and to see what he was doing as far as getting good literature to Mozambican pastors and involved in training them. Got to tour the medical hospital that they've built, a beautiful facility, which I'm sure he'll talk about in a minute, and hear his plans. And just to embarrass him a little bit, this is a real treat for me to have him here. When I go and speak to people about what is biblical missions, and particularly young people, university students, and we talk about, church planting, that it's biblical churches establishing new biblical churches. Now, what about other folks that aren't called to be a pastor? And so we talk about orphan ministry and medical missions. And he's always the example I give. This is what you get when a doctor who goes to the mission field is saturated with Scripture and committed to the local church.
Right. And that's the key, committed to the local church. And, I've seen this before. I've seen where, people will take care of the physical needs, and then those people may hear the gospel and then they scatter. But I've seen areas where the medical missions was tied to a local church, and you would see people, the gospel would be preached to them, they would be converted, and then they'd be brought into a local church where they could honestly be discipled and grow in maturity. And because ultimately, when we talk about helping a society, a society in poverty, a society without medical needs, it has been proven all over the world that the greatest thing you can do, short term, yes, we need to do all these things to meet physical needs, but the greatest long-term solution is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because when people are converted, when fathers stop drinking and start loving their wives and their children and start working, and it's amazing that the gospel is what really changes everything, because it changes the individual and it changes the family. And eventually it like a ripple effect just goes out and affects everything. And godly men, converted men, will eventually care also about the needs of others. And that's why we'll have things spring up, everything from hospitals to libraries to schools to everything, all because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's where it starts. Now, Sean mentioned the local church. Who's overseen this ministry for all these years?
Well, from the beginning, I was sent out by our local church. We wouldn't have had options for other mission organizations anyway because they weren't allowed to function in Mozambique.
Right.
But I went over with a contract from the government to work in a government hospital, and then spiritually I was under the oversight of our local church, the one that sent me. And they have continued as the ministry has grown and developed in all of these many areas. We've got a bookstore, we've got literature distribution, we've got annual nationwide pastors' conferences, 300 to 360 people attending, church leaders.
Amazing.
We have the hospital, of course. We've been given, which we'll talk about that in a minute, we were given the authorization to build this large, beautiful hospital. The Lord's raised up the funds for that, but everything has been carried out under the auspices of the elders of our local church and the people back home in the church who have supported us down through the years in practical ways. Our financial support obviously comes from many sources, but the local church has been responsible for what we've been doing all this time.
Yeah, the local church is the epicenter of missions, and elders are the leaders of missions. I think of Spurgeon, with a sword in one hand and a trowel, a towel in the other, or a trowel in the other, and I think of you with the same thing, except instead of a sword, it's a scalpel. And I've seen it so many places around the world where men who are in medical missions and biblical, truly biblical, have an amazing impact upon a country. Now, let's talk about the opportunities to get involved. Everything from the needs over there with regard to personnel to everything. I want to hear about it.
Well, over time, we outgrew the surgical facility I was operating from with the government. It only had one operating room. We got to the point where we had people waiting 6 months for their operations. And through a remarkable and a marvelous string of events that the Lord orchestrated, we were actually given authorization to build our own Christian-owned, privately owned surgical facility in Nampula. Before we were operating a little bit out in the bush. It was a rural hospital near the city, but now we were given land and authorization to build what's turned out to be a beautiful hospital right in the city of Nampula itself. And we're set to open soon. We have received from various sources $1 million for building this hospital. We have $220,000 still available to help it open and function until it can become hopefully self-supporting. But we need the personnel. It's a surgical specialty hospital, so we're looking particularly for general surgeons or other surgeons. We need at least 1 or 2 surgeons. We could use an anesthetist or anesthesiologist. We need someone skilled in hospital administration. And surprisingly, we're really dependent on a plant manager who knows how to keep a hospital plant functioning with all the equipment that we have. So we're looking for somebody with that skill, and an administrator to handle all the bureaucracy and the paperwork and so forth associated with keeping a hospital going. Those are the things that we're particularly needing in terms of looking at the medical manpower. But of course, we want these medical people to have a particular passion that will go beyond the medical work. We want them to have compassion and concern for the physical needs of the people, but we don't want them to lose sight of the great need that they have, which is for the gospel, and a tremendous opportunity to engage in evangelism as a part of your everyday routine, as well as special opportunities. We'll have evangelistic services going on every day, not just on Sunday afternoons. And we want all the missionaries to be concerned with taking maximum advantage of the opportunities to witness to their patients and to tell them about Jesus Christ. And since the gospel is so focal in this ministry, we want to be sure we agree on the gospel that we're proclaiming. And so we're looking for people who really believe in salvation by grace through faith, who are unequivocal about the doctrines of grace, who are committed to the 5 solas of the Reformation, people who have a God-centered gospel that will produce genuine conversions and God-centered Christians as the result. And people who are concerned for the local church. The churches in Mozambique are a mission field in themselves, and we'd like to see them actively engaged in strengthening existing churches and also planting excellent biblical churches wherever they have the opportunity, because all of those things are needed, and we're hopeful that the medical missionaries will have a passion for the spiritual needs in the area where we'll be serving.
Now, I know we'll get asked this question: is there a need for a general practitioner who's not necessarily a surgeon, or a family doctor?
I'm glad you mentioned that. We need that. It's a surgical hospital, but in the clinic we'll take care of everything that shows up. And generally we'll admit only the surgical patients, schedule them for procedures. But we can admit some internal medicine patients. The rest we'd have to refer out to the general hospitals around town. But yes, we definitely need a generalist, a general practitioner, emergency room specialist, somebody who can handle whatever walks in the door to oversee the clinic. And we're looking for people, too, who can train the Mozambicans. We will be hiring on Mozambican doctors to the extent we can do that, and we'll need to train them. So we're hoping that all of the people would be board certified and able to train Mozambican doctors in the areas of their expertise.
What about, and again, I know we'll get emails on this, what about qualified nurses?
We can take some qualified nurses, but for the most part, the government has trained many nurses, and they have a lot of unemployed nurses. And so they want us to hire Mozambicans. They don't want expatriates to take work away from the Mozambicans. Anesthetists, nurse anesthetists, are in short supply, so we could take a nurse anesthetist. But for most of the other positions, the government really wants us to hire from the local population. And it's an opportunity for the church in Mozambique. They have many unemployed nurses, pharmacists, those types of medical specialists that they want us to hire from their populations.
Now, I know that the core need is people who will come there and live.
Yes.
That's the great need. But what about people who would, medical professionals who would want to make a real and purposeful mission trip there for training, or is there open doors for that?
Absolutely.
For a short term?
Yes, absolutely. We're hoping to take full advantage of people who can come short term, so we can learn from them. They can help us with the things that we ourselves are not trained in, and they can leave behind physicians who are more capable than before they came, and then they can also help us with the load that we'll be carrying. So we're trying to provide for that, and we have built a guest house, a very nice guest house, so that they can even bring their families and stay and have a place to live right there on the compound while they're helping us.
What kind of surgeons, dealing with what specific areas mainly are you doing surgery on?
All areas, whatever you can do. I found that the Lord will bring, whatever specialty you put out, the Lord will bring people who need to avail themselves of that specialty.
What about orthopedic? Is any of that done, or is it mainly internal?
We need orthopedic surgeons. Orthopedic surgeons will need to bring a lot of prostheses with them and whatever the equipment that they need. But we do need orthopedic surgeons. I'd like to have a full-time orthopedic surgeon if we had one, but we're not geared up. We don't have the equipment to support all the types of work that an orthopedic surgeon does. But a lot of those men come with those resources in their
I just
baggage.
brought that up because without them I wouldn't even be walking.
Yeah.
So,
no, we're hoping to get an orthopedic surgeon as soon as we can.
All right. And so let's, how are you going to, I know this need is out there, and I know you're not the kind of person who's going to be just on the internet and doing all kinds of things. How can the word get out? That
we generally, in the past, I have gone to like-minded churches, and I've presented the ministry there, and I've asked the people, they don't have to be medical people, but people who understand where we're coming from and who themselves know physicians that resonate on the same frequency, asking them to please put us together they know about us. Let the physicians that they know who don't know about us find out about us, put us together. And through the years, we've had some good relationships come up. But the hospital at the time was not ready to open. And some of those had to peel off and go to other mission hospitals. But we are close to opening now. And it is time for us to find these people who are looking for a hospital that's not real ecumenical, a hospital where we're all functioning in agreement on the desire for evangelism and the gospel that we proclaim. But we need people to help us put us together. Here's the hospital in Nampula, and they can get us in touch through HeartCry with these individuals that would be good candidates for missionary doctors in this hospital.
And when we talk about the gospel, and we've already gone through this, we're talking about the Son of God, God the Son, who became incarnate, who lived a perfect life, who went to Calvary, who bore the sins of his people, who suffered the wrath of God in their place, who died and rose again from the dead and is seated at the right hand of Christ and is the way, at right hand of the Father, and is the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through the Son.
Yes.
A very explicit gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's so important. So this has been a great interview. And is there anything else that you would like to share with the people who are going to see this?
Well, I just want to end with an illustration of the wonderful opportunities, not only medically, but back in 1994 at the government hospital, despite unfavorable conditions in so many ways, we had wonderful opportunities to proclaim the gospel. And every Sunday afternoon with the evangelistic services, I would hand out the Gospels of John. I'd sell Bibles for $1 a piece. And in 1994, in 1 year, as I was keeping track of what was happening that year, just at the Sunday afternoon evangelistic services, we were able to proclaim the gospel to over 4,000 people, distributed 4,000 gospel portions, and sold hundreds of Bibles for $1 a piece. And the amazing thing is, this was all at a government hospital that was ruled by communists, where it was illegal even for a pastor to come in and pray at the bedside of one of his own parishioners out loud where other people might hear it. And yet these were the opportunities that we have, and we're hoping in our own hospital we'll be able to magnify that several times over. And so it's a wonderful opportunity, very satisfying to be involved both in the medical needs and spiritual needs and strengthening the local churches. So I hope many people would be excited about getting involved in that.
What do you, let's get back to when you came back and you were talking about all this. I remember you were glowing. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit more about just the conference and things that you were?
Well, at the conference, it was, I think the year I went, there was a couple of hundred pastors there. Would that be an accurate number?
We've been having between 270 and 330 in the last few years.
Yeah. And to see these pastors just hungry for truth. And those who were speaking, it was Dr. Woodrow, another brother who was a missionary for a while in Mozambique, who teaches now in South Africa at a school where some of our missionaries are involved, Dr. Peterson, and then the local Mozambican men that Dr. Woodrow's been pouring truth into for years. And so that's what I love about this story, is just how he had a heart for evangelizing Mozambicans, for getting the gospel to them. He goes into the country, uses medical missions as a door. We've heard these incredible stories of how he shared the gospel in the hospital. But then he saw the crying need for healthy churches in that country. Where are these people who get saved? Where are they going to go? And it's almost in a sense like he was spiritually distracted from medicine and just begins to pour himself into getting truth into these churches and getting truth to the pastors. Now we've seen God raise up some very promising young men who are brilliant intellectually, who are committed to biblical doctrine and church. Now they are ready to start planting churches. And now it seems like God has brought his attention back to medicine, and let's evangelize and get more sheep who can then be put into these biblical churches that are going to be established. It's just a beautiful story.
Amen. That is absolutely wonderful. Well, one more question. You've been there since 1990.
1990.
1990. And here we are in 2020. What are you hoping that the next 10 or 20 years are looking like?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. My great desire, the vision that I think the Lord has been leading us toward all this time, which is not yet realized, I really long to see the hospital functioning, helping people in our community, gaining a lot of attention for Jesus Christ and the gospel, and then people coming to the hospital, coming into contact with the gospel, and then having excellent biblical churches that they can be referred to, those who are desiring to carry on with their learning about Jesus Christ and growing in Him. And so that we'd have the church planting work going on, the evangelistic work going on, and then to continue with all the literature ministries. We have reading circles, we have free book literature distribution to pastors, continue with the conferences, continue with the seminars and systematic theology, and see the churches being strengthened, large-scale evangelism happening through the hospital, and biblical churches growing and strengthening, growing stronger as they also strengthen the believers and the churches. To see everything functioning with all the pieces in their proper place is what my desire is, and we're getting close, but not quite there.
But the great need then, as always, is the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. And in this case, it's medical laborers with a passion for the gospel and a passion for their craft, of course. Well, I wanted to do this video. We did it kind of just off the cuff here because I was so impressed by the ministry and by the man that's been involved in this ministry and the sacrifice that it's taken to get it this far. We will have, at the end of this film, we will have website information, contact information on how you can contact either HeartCry or contact our dear beloved brother here in order to see how you can get involved. But I would ask you, especially if you're in the medical profession, to pray and ask the Lord, would this be the opportunity He's given you to really make a mark on a very, very needy land? And remember this, we are to do all to the glory of God, and we are to do all to the best of our ability. We need medical professionals, surgeons, administrators, general practitioners, who have dedicated themselves to medicine for the benefit of people. And we need those same people to have dedicated themselves to the Lord and the understanding of Scripture, so that we not only meet the temporal needs of people, which are important, but also, and most importantly, the eternal needs of people. That God be glorified through the redemptive work of His Son in the conversion of many people in Mozambique and beyond. So God bless you, and stay looking at this film to see the contact information. Have a great day.